Back again. Come in, shut the door, mind what you touch. Some things don't like new owners. I'm your wee dark librarian, collector of strange histories, listener to half-forgotten warnings, and someone who absolutely does not buy antiques without asking questions. Tonight, we're talking about cursed objects and haunted curiosities. Not Hollywood props, not jump scare nonsense. Real folklore, real beliefs, and the very old idea that objects can remember. The mirror that no one will remove, the charm nailed into a wall, the box that you're told never to open, even though no one can quite remember why. These stories come from Scotland, but honestly, they could come from your house too, because every culture has them. So settle in, don't touch anything that feels wrong, and let's begin. When people in folklore said that something was cursed, they didn't usually mean it was evil. They meant that it was tied to something. A death, a promise, a protection, even a mistake. Objects weren't neutral. People believed that intense emotion soaked into matter. Grief, violence, sickness, obsession, unfinished business. That's why items linked to death were feared the most, especially if the death was sudden, violent, or unjust. Over time, people noticed patterns. The same room feeling heavy, the same object present when things went wrong, the same unease again and again. Once an object became connected to enough of these moments, you didn't destroy it, you respected it, you worked around it, and you left it exactly where it was. Because in older belief systems, breaking the rules was always worse than living with them. The other thing about older belief systems is that people didn't separate the physical from the emotional. A chair wasn't just a chair. A ring wasn't just a ring. Objects were part of the household, part of daily life. Present for arguments, illness, births, and deaths. If something stayed through enough significant moments, it stopped being neutral. People didn't ask, is this object dangerous? They asked, what has this object seen? And more importantly, what has it absorbed? That's why destruction was avoided. Breaking an object wasn't cleansing, it was risky, because if something had already taken on grief or fear, destroying it meant releasing whatever had settled there. Respect wasn't belief, it was caution. There's an old tale found across Britain, told in different places with the same warning at its heart. A man, sometimes a grave robber, sometimes just desperate, came upon a freshly dug grave. The body had been buried quickly. No prayers, no peace. On the corpse's hand was a ring. Gold, heavy, valuable enough to change a man's luck. He took it. That night, he woke up, unable to move. The air pressed down on his chest like a weight. His throat burned. Fingers, cold, furious fingers, tightened around his neck. He tried to scream, but nothing came out. He swore that he could feel breath against his face, that he could smell the damp earth, and he could hear soil shifting. When he finally woke for real, gasping and shaking, the ring was gone. At dawn, he returned to the grave. The earth hadn't been disturbed. The coffin was sealed. But the ring was back on the corpse's hand, exactly where it had been before. like it had been returned, corrected. The story never says what happens to the man after that, but it doesn't need to. The message was clear enough. Some things do not belong to the living, and some debts are collected immediately. Now, most versions of the story end there. There's no punishment, no justice, no explanation. The man isn't chased, he isn't cursed for life. The story simply stops, because the lesson wasn't about what happened next. It was about the boundary that he had crossed, and how quickly it got corrected. The dead reclaimed what was theirs. There's another story that you hear again and again, sometimes in different towns, sometimes with different details, but always the same rule. Don't move the mirror. The house is old, stone walls, cold corners, the kind of place where footsteps sound different at night. The mirror hangs in a hallway, tall, dark framed, slightly tilted, not decorative, not pretty, just there. When someone asks why it's never been replaced, the answer is always the same. It's always been there. In one version, after a death in the house, the mirror was covered with a cloth. After the next death, no one uncovered it at all. Years later, a visitor asked why it hadn't been removed. The reply was simple. We tried once. They said that the mirror had been taken down. It was leaned against a wall and it was left overnight. By morning, it was back in place. No one admitted to moving it. No one ever tried again. And from then on, it stayed. Covering mirrors after a death is actually an old practice, especially in Scotland and in parts of Europe. People believed that mirrors could trap a soul, attract spirits, allow the dead to linger, or reflect something that shouldn't be seen. Mirrors weren't just reflective surfaces, they were thresholds. And in folklore, anything that acted as a doorway was dangerous, especially when someone had just crossed over. So people covered them, and sometimes they never uncovered them again. In folklore, mirrors weren't furniture. As we said, they were thresholds. Anything that reflected you too clearly, or not clearly enough, was treated with suspicion, especially in houses where death had passed through more than once. That's why mirrors were covered quickly, and why in some homes they were never uncovered again, not because people were afraid every day, but because they remembered the cost of ignoring old rules. There's a quieter story found in various parts of Britain. Less dramatic, but deeply unsettling. A family inherited a heavy wooden chest. Nothing ornate, no markings, just old. It was moved from house to house over the years, and in every place, the same thing happened. Rooms felt colder. Sleep became difficult. Animals avoided the place where it sat. When the chest was stored away, the house settled. When it was brought out again, the unease returned. Eventually, the family stopped moving it at all. They didn't destroy it. They didn't open it. They left it exactly where it was. Because wherever it went, the discomfort followed. No ghost, no voice, just presence. Not all cursed objects began as threats. Some were meant to protect. Iron charms nailed into walls, symbols carved above doors, amulets hidden beneath floorboards. One story tells of a house protected by an iron charm placed above the hearth. For years, the house was calm. Then, renovations began. The charm was removed, only for a moment, but that winter, animals refused to enter the kitchen. The fire wouldn't stay lit, and strange knocks were heard near the hearth at night. The charm was put back, and everything stopped. After that, no one questioned it. Not because anyone believed anymore, but because, what if? There are stories of rings that no one wears, boxes passed down unopened, furniture that must never be sold, and items wrapped and rewrapped for decades. No dramatic curse, no explosions, just consequences. A family member who falls ill, a run of bad luck, a house that never quite settles, enough to stop people trying again. Because once something proves itself once, no one wants to be the next test. And dolls, they weren't always toys either. They were stand-ins, representations, and sometimes they were vessels. That's why broken dolls were buried, not thrown away. A doll with a name was never empty. What's unsettling isn't that these objects caused harm, it's that people noticed patterns and they stopped testing them. Folklore is full of warnings that only exist because someone tried first. Beds, chairs, mirrors, objects that people lived with. When tragedy struck, these items stayed behind, watching new lives unfold in the same space. That's where The House Feels Wrong begins. These objects weren't about terror, they were about control. In a world where people had little power over illness, weather, death, or loss, rules mattered. Leaving something untouched meant nothing worse has happened yet. And sometimes that was enough to feel safe. Not believing, but respecting the possibility. And leaving something untouched wasn't about fear either. That was also about control. When illnesses had no cure, when death arrived without warning, rules gave people something solid to hold on to. They couldn't stop loss, but they could choose to not make it worse. A woman inherited a locket from a distant relative. Every night she dreamed of standing at a door that wouldn't open. Eventually, she returned the locket to the grave. The dream stopped. Sometimes the cure wasn't destruction, just returning what never wanted to leave. Of course, as you know by now, people weren't helpless. They used iron near objects, salt for cleansing, running water to break ties, burial instead of disposal, and never saying thank you for inherited items. Not superstition, survival. And none of these were guarantees either. They were gestures, ways of saying, I acknowledge this, I respect it, I won't pretend that it didn't happen. Sometimes that was enough. Now, as with everything we discuss here, cursed objects weren't about monsters. They were explanations. For grief, for loss, for the sense that something had shifted and couldn't be shifted back. Folklore gave people rules when there were no answers. Don't touch the mirror, don't move the charm, don't open the box. Not because people believed in curses, but because structure helped them survive uncertainty. Some pain doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. And life carried on. And that's the truth about cursed objects and haunted curiosities. Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly unsettling. Next time, we'll step away from the objects and listen for the signs that people feared the most. Whispers, knocks, sounds meant as warnings. Death omens and the spirits tied to them. Until then, trust your instincts, respect old rules, and if something in your house has been there longer than anyone can remember, maybe don't touch it. Good night.